In this video, we are going to talk about the fungal phylum Basidiomycota, which are more commonly referred to as the club fungi. This phylum includes most of the edible fungi, so the fungi that you can go to the grocery store and buy it and eat it, or you can even go foraging in the forest for it. But you have to be careful because it also includes poisonous fungi, which can potentially kill you. There are also some fungi in this phylum that are plant pathogens. So two examples of types of Basidiomycota include shelf fungi, and you can see that in this picture here. And the shelf fungi are often found attached to tree bark. So if you're out hiking and you see the mushrooms that are on the side of the tree, that is likely a type of Basidiomycota. There are also gill fungi, which we will talk about in more detail on the next slide. The Basidiomycota include the fungi, or I really should say the mushrooms, that you are probably somewhat familiar with. And these mushrooms are also called gill fungi, and that's because they have these gill-like structures underneath their caps. And these gills are actually made out of compacted hyphae. And if we were to zoom in, so you can see in this picture here, it's showing this mushroom with these gills. And then if we kind of zoom in, we can see that these gills have this kind of convoluted shape here. And if we were to zoom in even closer to just kind of one area of one of these gills, you can see that there are these club-like structures called basidia. Basidia is plural, basidium is singular. And these basidia are what those clubs, so that's how it gets the name club fungi, because these are described as club-shaped, and the spores are at the ends of these basidia. The fungi in Basidiomycota are more likely to do sexual reproduction than asexual. The mycelia of the Basidiomycota may either be haploid, which remember is 1N, or dikaryotic, which remember we refer to that as N plus N. So dikaryotic means that one cell has two haploid nuclei, whereas haploid, it just means a cell with the same or one kind of haploid nuclei. The sexual spores that are produced by the Basidiomycota are called basidiospores, and they form in that club-shaped basidia, which we saw on the previous slide. And remember, the basidia are in the gills of the mushroom. And you can see these mycelia on this picture here. So the haploid mycelium is found here. Notice how it is designated as 1N, and you can see that within each type of mycelium, they only have one type of nucleus. So we've got this positive mating type, which is designated by the red haploid nuclei, and then you've got the negative mating type, which is represented by the blue haploid nuclei. The dikaryotic version can be seen here. And you can see in these cells in the mycelium, you can see that the cells each cell has one blue haploid nucleus and one red haploid nucleus. And so it's giving us this condition here, and that's the dikaryon. So really in this picture, it's showing some haploid parts to the mycelium, but then it's also showing the dikaryotic parts here. And the production of a dikaryon from haploid cells occurs during plasmagamy. Remember that plasmagamy is where you have two cells with a haploid nucleus in each. And their cell membranes and cell walls and cytoplasm fuse, but the nuclei do not fuse. So we end up with this single cell that has multiple haploid nuclei, and this is the dikaryon. So remember, this dikaryon is not a diploid cell because the two nuclei have not fused yet. So the genetic information in the haploid nuclei have not been brought together yet. When we talked about the general life cycle of fungi, remember we talked about plasmagamy being step 1 and then karyogamy being step 2. But with Basidiomycota, there's actually a step that kind of occurs between plasmagamy and karyogamy, and that's happening here with mitosis. And so what happens is that after this plasmagamy occurs, the cells go through mitosis in order to form the basidia, which are in these gills underneath the mushroom here. Once the basidia forms, karyogamy occurs. And remember that karyogamy is just where that dikaryon so that cell that has two haploid nuclei, the two nuclei are then going to combine to form a diploid nucleus. And recall that within this nucleus, you are going to have a combination of paired red and blue chromosomes. And the cell with the diploid nucleus is now called a zygote. This zygote is then going to go through the third step of fungal reproduction, which is meiosis. And remember that with meiosis, each one of these cells is ultimately going to produce 4 daughter cells. And these daughter cells are going to have haploid nuclei, but the haploid nuclei are going to have a different arrangement of chromosomes than what we saw in the original cell that brought these cells together. And you can see that happening on this picture here. So this is the basidium that is going through meiosis. And in this case, the nuclei have split. They have now formed haploid nuclei, and you can see that it's designated as 1N because each of these nuclei are haploid. Then cytokinesis occurs, and it forms 4 separate basidiospores. These basidiospores are then dispersed, and germination might occur if they find a suitable place to land and grow. Now you'll notice that we mentioned that there is a positive mating type and a negative mating type involved. Now Basidiomycota might be homothallic, or they can be heterothallic. Homothallic means that both mating types are found in the same mycelium, and so they are able to self-fertilize their spores. Heterothallic means that you have to have two separate organisms in order to conduct sexual reproduction. So you would have to have two different mycelia from two different fungal organisms to come together in order to form that dikaryon. Now I'm going to tack on this slide about mold to this video because mold used to be classified together in one phylum, but molecular evidence, which means looking at things like genomics or the genetics, has revised this classification. So these fungi that are kind of collectively known as mold, some species are in Basidiomycota, which is the fungus that we're talking about in this video, but some belong to Ascomycota, which we covered in a separate video. With mold, most live on land, but some are aquatic. And we should go back to this first bullet point that I skipped over. And mold are referred to imperfect fungi, which means that they don't have a sexual phase, so they only reproduce asexually. Mold have a fuzzy mycelium, or fuzzy mycelia for plural, and you can kind of see that on this petri dish here. They give you this kind of fuzzy appearance to them. Now, some mold can be pathogenic or parasitic or toxic, and so these are going to be detrimental fungi that can make people and animals and plants sick or even die. But mold also has some commercial applications. So there are some cheeses that actually rely on the development of mold in order to make the cheese. And Roquefort and Camembert are two that fit in that category. Penicillin is also created from a mold, and penicillin is an antibiotic. And it was actually the first antibiotic that was discovered. And it was actually discovered by accident when mold grew on a petri dish that was supposed to be culturing bacteria. And the scientists realized or noticed that the mold were actually killing off the bacteria. And that led to the development of these medications that we now know as antibiotics.